it doesn't seem to me that much has changed since Brexit. And I think that we're in a very odd situation, really. There are two things which have sent an almighty rocket to the establishment. And by the establishment, I mean international, big, globalized business in particular. And those two things are the election of Donald Trump as president and Brexit. Those two things, I think, have shocked that establishment as never before. And what we are seeing now, particularly in the reaction to COVID-19 and the curtailing of people's freedoms, and in things like the Online Harms Bill and other proposals, is a determination by those people that these things will not happen again. And the reason for that is that they are dependent upon immigration to continue the circle of big business which is now controlling our country and, in my opinion, controlling much of its government as well. The difficulty that we have is this: if we are to rely upon foreign imports, effectively foreign immigrants to staff our companies, to run businesses, etc., then we are going down a very dangerous road because it simply becomes a continual circle. I do not believe that the continued rate of immigration to this country, which is still extremely high, is something which leads to better jobs and better opportunities for British people. Rather, what it does is, if you are low paid in this country, it leads to a depression of your wages, and it leads to increased competition for the lowest paid jobs among people who have come to this country purely for economic advantage. This cannot be right. Now, if we are to look then at the roots of this in big business, we need also to be questioning the role of certain players in these games. I'm told that Bill Gates came and had a meeting with the Prime Minister not so long ago in this country. I doubt whether he was simply dropping in for tea. It is beyond doubt that there are people who wield immense power in the way in which things are done in this country. And I suspect that the instincts which Boris Johnson may have had, and he is after all somebody who is primarily libertarian in those instincts, are overridden time and time again by people who have greater power than he does. In other words, he is not the be-all and end-all. The buck does not stop with him. There are layers of power above him and layers of control, and essentially, if he wants to continue to do the job, he must appease those people and ensure that he does not step out of line too much. I think we can look to the identity of those groups in various different ways, but one of the chief identities which I would point to is that of global groups. The United Nations, the World Health Organizations, pressure from China, pressure from other countries that is to do with British assets. We have unfortunately allowed ourselves to sleepwalk into a situation where too many of our assets are owned by foreign companies and foreign countries. And it is often said that it is very difficult to achieve autarky, which is something that was proposed a long time ago by various politicians in this country. For those unfamiliar with the term, it means self-dependence. In other words, we are reliant upon ourselves to produce coal, steel, the other necessities for the country to run. The problem, as we've seen with gas very recently, is if that you rely upon others, such as the Russians, to provide us with gas through pipelines, then inevitably you are then going to be at their mercy when there is something that they want. If they want, for example, to get clearance for a new pipeline, which seems to have been the case, and they decide that they're going to slow down the supply, the result is suddenly we see our gas bills rocket. This, again, cannot be the best way to do things. It is not so long ago that we saw ourselves much more in the line of providing British industry for British workers, and that industry was not merely an economic way of doing things, but it was also a social way of doing things. I don't want to bang on about COVID too much because it's a subject on which I know many people have many different views. My main concern with it is the way in which it has been used to divide our society and to sow mutual suspicion which has led in turn to a breakdown of social networks which were in a very healthy situation before all of this came along. It has led to a mistrust of people, which I think is deeply unhealthy. And I think the messaging from the government needed to be far more nuanced and far more in line with the traditions of Britain, which are above all the traditions of freedom and the traditions of individual liberty, even if there were a health emergency at stake. I know Lord Sumption, who has talked consistent sense in this, has spoken very eloquently against the idea of lockdowns, both from an economic perspective and also from the perspective of the simple the simple mechanics of the way in which hospitals work. So we have apparently endured these lockdowns in order to spare the NHS overload. But the fact is, as a result, we have an enormous backlog now of people waiting for routine surgery. We also have an enormous backlog, which is, at the moment, almost completely unknown, of people who have simply not gone to their doctor during this time because it has been too difficult to do so. And in that situation, I cannot help feeling that whilst the NHS may have bought itself some short-term time, it has in fact only stored up the problem for now. I also think that there is far more to this than meets the eye. The NHS is not able to allow its members any freedom of speech. They cannot speak out. If they do, they will lose their jobs. There are very few whistleblowers who have broken ranks and come and talk to us about what they believe is going on. Thank goodness there are some, because I think we've learned a number of things from them. But one of the things that is very clear is that there is certainly an agenda there which is far more than the simple containing of a virus which has a very high survival rate, and where, in my opinion, we should have targeted the assistance better and earlier to those who were most vulnerable. And in particular, we should have looked at the care home situation very early on, knowing that it was the elderly, the over 75s, who were the most likely to catch this and to die from it. So that being said, where we are now, I think, is a very odd position because we are told there will be no COVID passports. However, if you look into the government's website and look at the regulations, you will discover that, in fact, COVID passes, as they call them, they don't call them passports, they call them COVID passes, are still going to be used. They are not only doing the electronic version, which you can have on your mobile phone, but just in case you don't have a mobile phone, they are introducing them on paper as well. So in those circumstances, we should wonder whether it is going to be the case that these restrictions, which we were told were temporary and which would be lifted after a short period, are in fact planned to be with us for longer. And if they are planned to be with us for longer, we should be asking some more questions. Why was it that the Coronavirus Act, was extended automatically without so much as a vote in the House of Commons? And a situation in which the Speaker said it was not the mood of the House to have a vote. Was that because our elected representatives all believe that these restrictions are in the public interest? I don't believe that is what they have said. I think in the past we have had a number of MPs who have spoken out very eloquently against these restrictions and who have made a very good case for them not to be reimposed. And yet their voices were not heard. Something is going on. Now, in the situation where clearly these restrictions have been extended, we must then look to how we can continue normal life. And I think it has been enormously difficult. We have seen the curtailing of many of the normal activities in this country to an extent which we would not have thought possible. Even during the time of plague, the churches were still open and services were still held in them. And it was held to be disapproving for the priest or for anybody else involved to seek to go away from the city to the country to escape the risk of being infected by the plague. Now we have a situation where there is a very different spirit. It is not the Blitz spirit of World War II. It is not the spirit we had during the times of plague. Rather, it seems to me to be a spirit which is encouraged by big business and corporatism in general, which is that of atomization. Every person for themselves. They should look at their own interests first. This is not the British way. We are naturally a people who take a great deal of care about others, whether they be in our own family, in our own community, or indeed simply because they are part of the same national origin as us, or indeed because they are complete strangers who may have nothing in common with us at all. That is far more characteristic of the British way than this situation now, where people are effectively put in their boxes and told to stay there. All I can say, and I will wind up now, all I can say in that situation is that I believe that a coherent resistance to any further measures that erode our liberty is needed, and I think it is more likely to come from within our movement here than from elsewhere. I don't see it at the moment, but I look forward very much to seeing it coalesce. In the meantime, there are a number of people who are working very hard to see if it does actually happen. But until then, I would just urge each of you individually to do what you can to stop the state from aggregating to itself further powers that are by nature those which belong to each of us as an individual citizen. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's a person here, I think, who deserves a certain amount of recognition. She's just been elected to Dresden for the AFD. She hasn't had parliamentary representation before. She overturned the CDU, which was reduced to 19%. Her name is Barbara Leck. There she is over there. Perhaps you'd stand up, Barbara. She's overturned a CDU majority there. She campaigned extremely hard. Dresden is in the center of Saxony, and she deserves all our applause and our praise, because your enemies in Germany are our enemies over here. We're talking about it's all the enemies of the apocalypse. Globalism, mass immigration, wokeism, political correctness, which is social Marxism. So we commend you, and more power to your elbow, and I hope you achieve a lot when you take up your seat on Tuesday.